you are informed.
World War II was a global war that lasted from 1939 to 1945. The great powers of the period and the majority of the world's countries participated in the war. And two opposing military alliances were established, the Allies and the Axis. In this total war, in which more than 100 million personnel from more than 30 countries directly participated, the major parties of the war mobilized all their economic, industrial, and scientific capacities for war. World War II resulted in 70 to 85 million deaths. World War II was the deadliest war in human history, with more civilian casualties than military personnel. Millions of people died from genocides such as the Holocaust, planned starvation, massacres, and disease. Many war technologies such as tanks, armored vehicles, warplanes, strategic bombers, aircraft carriers, radar and sonar. The development of nuclear weapons and rockets played an important role in the war. World War II is considered to have begun on September 1, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, followed by the United Kingdom and France declaring war on Germany on September 3. From late 1939 to early 1941, through a series of operations and treaties, Germany invaded and took control of most of continental Europe. He also formed the Axis alliance with Italy, Japan, and other countries, with the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact of August 1939. Germany and the Soviet Union partitioned and invaded Poland. Taking advantage of this non-aggression agreement, the Soviet Union annexed parts of Finland and Romania and all of the Baltic states. Following the start of operations in North Africa and East Africa, and the collapse of France within 6 weeks in mid-1940. The war was fought mostly between the European Axis powers and the British Empire. It continued with operations in the Balkans, the Battle of the Atlantic, the Air War in Britain, and the Blitz. On June 22, 1941, Germany invaded the European Axis powers and the Soviet Union, opening the Eastern Front, the largest land front in history, and plunged the Axis, especially the German Wehrmacht, into a war of attrition. The Empire of Japan was not involved in Germany's campaign against the Soviet Union. Japan, which aimed to dominate Asia and the Pacific, had been at war with the Republic of China since 1937. Japan, which aimed to dominate Asia and the Pacific, had been at war with the Republic of China since 1937. In December 1941, Japan launched simultaneous attacks, such as the attack on Pearl Harbor, against nearly all of the American and British territories and colonies in Southeast Asia and the Central Pacific. After the US and UK declared war on Japan, the European Axis powers declared war on the US in solidarity with their allies. Japan soon captured most of the Western Pacific. Their advance was halted after they lost the Battle of Midway in 1942. Later, Germany and Italy suffered heavy defeats against the Allied forces in North Africa and against the Soviet Union in Stalingrad. Setbacks in 1943, for example, a series of German defeats on the Eastern Front, the Allied invasion of Sicily and the Italian mainland, and the Allied campaign in the Pacific forced the Axis to make strategic retreats on all fronts. In 1944, the Western Allies retook German-occupied France and the Soviet Union began invading Germany, completely expelling the Axis powers from its territory. Throughout 1944 and 1945, as Japan's advances in China reversed, the Allies inflicted significant blows on the Japanese Navy and captured strategic Western Pacific islands. The war in Europe resulted in the liberation of German-occupied territories, the invasion of Germany by the Soviet Union and the Western Allies, the Battle of Berlin, the suicide of Adolf Hitler, and the unconditional surrender of Germany on May 8, 1945. Following the Allied Potsdam Conference on July 26, 1945, and Japan's refusal to surrender under these terms, the United States dropped the first atomic bombs on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. and on Nagasaki on August 9th. Faced with a potential invasion of the Japanese islands, the possibility of additional atomic bomb attacks, and the Soviet entry into war against Japan and invasion of Manchuria on August 9th, Japan was left with no choice. He announced his intention to surrender on August 15, 1945, and the Allies achieved victory in Asia. Following the war, Germany and Japan were occupied and war crimes trials were opened against German and Japanese leaders. Despite documented war crimes, mostly committed in Greece and Yugoslavia, Italian leaders and generals generally did not face penalties thanks to diplomatic activities. World War II changed the political grouping and social structure of the world. The United Nations UN was established to promote international cooperation and prevent potential future conflicts, and the victorious great powers China, France, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States became permanent members of the Security Council. The Soviet Union and the United States emerged as rival superpowers, setting the stage for the Cold War that lasted almost half a century. Following the massive damage Europe suffered from the war, the influence of its great powers waned, triggering the decolonization of Asia and Africa. Most countries whose industries were damaged turned to economic recovery and expansion. Political integration, especially in Europe, began with an effort to prevent future hostilities and pre-war hostilities and establish a common identity. The war in Europe is generally accepted to have begun on September 1, 1939, with the Polish expedition and the declaration of war on Germany by the United Kingdom and France 2 days later. The dates accepted as the start of the war in the Pacific include July 7, 1937, when the Second Sino-Japanese War began, and September 19, 1931, when Japan invaded Manchuria. Some other views include the British historian A.J.P., who argues that the Sino-Japanese War and the war in Europe and its colonies occurred simultaneously, and that the two wars merged in 1941. It follows Taylor's views. Other start dates used for World War II include October 3, 1935 is the date when the Italo-Abyssinian War began. Besides, both the first and there is also the opinion that World War II was part of the same European Civil War, or Second 30 Years' War. British historian Anthony Beevor. The beginning of World War II is marked by the Battle of Khalkhin Gol, fought between the Soviet Union and the forces of Mongolia and Japan from May to September 1939. There is also no universal consensus on the end date of the war. At that time, it was accepted that the war ended not with Japan's official surrender on September 2, 1945, officially ending the war in Asia, but with the Armistice Agreement on August 14, 1945. A peace treaty between Japan and the Allies was signed in 1951. A treaty concerning the future of Germany in 1990 paved the way for the reunification of East and West Germany, which resolved many of the post-war problems caused by World War II. A formal peace treaty was never signed between Japan and the Soviet Union. World War I radically changed the political map of Europe. With the defeat of the Central Powers Austria-Hungary, Germany, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire, and the Bolsheviks seizing power in Russia in 1917 and establishing the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, the victorious Allied powers such as France, Belgium, Italy, Romania, and Greece gained new territory as a result of the war, and new nation-states emerged from the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires. The League of Nations was founded in 1919 during the Paris Peace Conference to prevent a potential future world war. The main objectives of the organization were to prevent armed conflict through collective security, disarmament, and resolve international disputes through peaceful negotiations and arbitration. Despite the strong pacifist views that emerged after World War I, irredentism and revanchist nationalism began to develop in many European countries. During the same period, these views were particularly evident in Germany. due to the significant territorial, colonial and economic losses imposed by the Versailles Peace Treaty. Because of the treaty, Germany lost 13% of its territory in Europe, and all of its overseas territories, was prohibited from annexing other states, was forced to pay reparations, and had limits placed on the size and equipment of the country's armed forces. With the German Revolution of 1918 to 1919, the German Empire collapsed and a democratic government was established, later known as the Weimar Republic. The interwar period saw conflict between supporters of the newly established republic and hardline opponents on both the right and left. Italy, an Entente ally, made some post-war territorial gains. However, Italian nationalists were angry that the promises made by the United Kingdom and France to ensure Italian entry into the war had not been fulfilled in the peace treaty. From 1920 to 1925, the fascist movement led by Benito Mussolini. He abolished representative democracy, cracked down on socialist, left, and liberal forces, and promised to make Italy a great power. He seized power in Italy with a nationalist, totalitarian and class collaborationist ideology, pursuing an expansionist foreign policy that promised to create a new Roman Empire. Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in 1933, after a failed coup attempt to overthrow the German government in 1923. In his book Mein Kampf, Hitler stated that their only goal was not to repeal the Treaty of Versailles. He explained that his goals included defeating communism and ensuring the dominance of the German race throughout the world on a European basis. After coming to power, he abolished democracy and soon launched a massive rearmament effort. Stalin, who frequently criticized the West until Hitler became Chancellor, joined the League of Nations in 1934 after Hitler became Chancellor, and began to advocate international collective security. After Stalin's moves, the United States sent some delegations to Moscow, fearing Nazi expansion. France also took various steps to establish relations with the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, in order to secure its alliance, France turned a blind eye to Italy's invasion of Ethiopia, which it wanted as a colony. The situation worsened with the legal reunification of the Saar region with Germany in early 1935, and Hitler violating the Treaty of Versailles by accelerating his rearmament program and introducing conscription. Romania, whose territory was expanding, and the newly established Poland formed an alliance. The alliance was broken by Romania when Nazi Germany declared war on Poland. To control Germany, the United Kingdom, France, and Italy signed the Treaty of Stresa in April 1935, an important step towards military globalization. However, in June of the same year, an independent maritime treaty was signed between the United Kingdom and Germany, easing previous restrictions. The Soviet Union, which became concerned about Germany's aims to invade large areas of Eastern Europe, prepared a mutual assistance agreement with France. However, the Franco-Soviet Pact had to go through the League of Nations bureaucracy before it could come into force, making the treaty ineffective. The USA, which was closely interested in the events in Europe and Asia, approved the neutrality laws in August of the same year. The Second Italo-Abyssinian War was a colonial war that began in October 1935 and ended in May 1936. The war began with the invasion of the Ethiopian Empire by the military operations launched by the armed forces of the Kingdom of Italy from Italian Somalia and Eritrea. The war, which resulted in the military occupation of Ethiopia and its annexation to the newly created Italian East Africa, also revealed the weakness of the League of Nations as a peacekeeping force. Both Italy and Ethiopia were member states of the League, but the League of Nations was ineffective, with Italy clearly violating Article 10 of the League Charter. The United Kingdom and France supported sanctions against Italy over the invasion, but the sanctions were not fully implemented and did not end the Italian invasion. Later, Italy ended its objections to Germany's annexation of Austria when the Civil War broke out in Spain. Hitler and Mussolini gave military support to the nationalist rebels, led by General Francisco Franco. Italy gave more support to the nationalists than the Nazis. In total, Mussolini sent more than 70,000 soldiers and 6,000 aviation personnel to Spain, as well as approximately 720 aircraft. These soldiers were supported by the German Air Force. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, supported the current government of the Spanish Republic, and was even its main supporter. During this period, the Soviet Union made global propaganda in favor of the Madrid government. More than 30,000 foreign volunteers, known as the International Brigades, also fought against the nationalists. Both Germany and the Soviet Union used this proxy war as an opportunity to test their most advanced weapons and tactics in combat. The nationalists won the war in April 1939, and Franco, now dictator, remained officially neutral throughout the war but mostly aligned himself with the Axis. Franco's major collaboration with Germany was the sending of volunteers to fight on the Eastern Front. In July 1937, Japan captured the former Chinese imperial capital Beijing in the aftermath of the Marco Polo Bridge incident, which resulted in a military campaign to invade all of China. In July 1937, Japan captured the former Chinese imperial capital, Beijing, in the aftermath of the Marco Polo Bridge incident, which resulted in a military campaign to invade all of China. From September to November, Japanese forces attacked Taiyuan, clashed with the National Revolutionary Army around the Niangzi Pass, and fought communist forces at Pingxing Pass. Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek deployed his best army to defend Shanghai. However, as a result of 3 months of fighting, the city fell. The Japanese continued to push back Chinese forces and captured the capital Nanjing. In December 1937, after the fall of Nanjing, tens or hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians and disarmed soldiers were massacred by the Japanese. During the mid to late 1930s, Japanese forces in Manchukuo occasionally engaged in border conflicts with the Soviet Union and Mongolia. The Hakashinran Doctrine, based on Japan's northward expansion, was viewed favorably by the Imperial Army at the time. This policy would be difficult to maintain due to the Japanese defeat at Lake Hassan in 1939, the ongoing Second Sino-Japanese War, and the Japanese ally Nazi Germany's pursuit of neutrality with the Soviets. During the mid to late 1930s, Japanese forces in Manchukuo occasionally engaged in border conflicts with the Soviet Union and Mongolia. The Hakashinran Doctrine, based on Japan's northward expansion, was viewed favorably by the Imperial Army at the time. This policy would be difficult to maintain due to the Japanese defeat at Lake Hassan in 1939, the ongoing Second Sino-Japanese War, and the Japanese ally Nazi Germany's pursuit of neutrality with the Soviets. Japan and the Soviet Union eventually signed a neutrality pact in April 1941, and Japan adopted the Nanshinran Doctrine, supported by the Navy and focusing on the south as opposed to the north, which eventually led to Japan's war with the United States and the Western Allies. In Europe, Italy and Germany were becoming increasingly aggressive. In March 1938, Germany annexed Austria, which provoked little reaction from other European countries. Encouraged by this, Hitler began to pressure Czechoslovakia over the Sudetenland, a region with an ethnic German population. Later, the United Kingdom and France followed British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's policy of appeasement, and he handed over this region to Germany, without the approval of the Soviet Union, with the Munich Agreement, which was made against the wishes of the Czechoslovak government, in exchange for the Nazis not having any other territorial claims. Soon after, Germany and Italy forced Czechoslovakia to cede more territory to Hungary, and Poland annexed the Zaolzie region of Czechoslovakia. Various historians say that for Stalin, the capitulationist attitude of England and France towards Germany was interpreted as leading the Nazis towards the east. For this reason, They wrote that the Soviet Union tried to reach an agreement with Hitler after Czechoslovakia was given to Hitler with the Munich Agreement. Although all of Germany's stated demands were met by the Munich Agreement, Hitler was personally angry that he could not capture all of Czechoslovakia in a single operation due to British intervention. In subsequent speeches, Hitler lashed out at British and Jewish warmongers, and in January 1939 ordered the secret enlargement of the German Navy to eliminate British naval superiority. In March 1939, Germany invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia and then divided the country, creating the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia and the Slovak Republic, a pro-German client state. Hitler also issued an ultimatum to Lithuania on the 20th of March 1939, forcing the annexation of the Klaipėda region, formerly known as the Memel region, to Germany. Alarmed, the United Kingdom and France assured their support for Polish independence after Hitler made new claims to the free city of Danzig. When Italy invaded Albania in April 1939, the same guarantee was given to Romania and Greece. Shortly after, France and the United Kingdom formed alliances with Poland. Germany and Italy formalized their own alliance with the Pact of Steel. Hitler accused the United Kingdom and Poland of trying to encircle Germany and annul the naval treaty he signed with the United Kingdom and the non-aggression pact he signed with Poland. In a meeting with his generals before the war, Hitler said, "For propaganda purposes, I will find an excuse to start the war. After all, the winner is not held accountable. What is important in the conduct of war is not the law but the victory itself," he said, in response to the United Kingdom's demands for direct negotiations to avoid war. Germany made demands of Poland as an excuse to worsen relations. On the 29th of August, Hitler requested that a fully authorized Polish diplomat come immediately to Berlin to negotiate the annexation of Danzig by Germany and that a referendum in the Danzig corridor be allowed, in which the German minority would vote for secession. Poland refused to comply with German demands, and during a meeting with the British ambassador Neville Henderson on the night of the 30th to the 31st of August, Ribbentrop said that he considered Germany's territorial claims to be rejected. The Soviet Union forced the Baltic states Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, which remained under the Soviet sphere of influence according to the German-Soviet non-aggression pact, to sign mutual assistance pacts providing for the deployment of Soviet troops in them. Shortly thereafter, significant amounts of Soviet military units moved towards the countries. Finland refused to sign a similar treaty and cede part of its territory to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union invaded Finland in November 1939 and was subsequently expelled from the League of Nations. Despite overwhelming numerical superiority, Soviet military success was minimal, and the Finnish-Soviet War ended with the Soviets annexing small amounts of territory from Finland in March 1940, after 105 days of fighting. After the Winter War, relations between the United States and the Soviet Union deteriorated. The failure of the Soviet Union Army to win the war, its weak appearance, and the failure of the League of Nations to stop the war, and the fact that the bluff of bombing Bakool against the Soviet Union did not work, encouraged Adolf Hitler. On May 7, 1945, General Jodl signed Germany's surrender document. Germany officially surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945. This date is celebrated as Victory Day. Russia celebrates it on May 9 due to the time difference. The surrender of Japan was announced on August 15, 1945, and was officially signed on September 2, 1945. It brought about the end of World War II. Thus, the remaining Pacific front of the war was also closed. Although Japan had to retreat to its own island, it continues to resist despite intense strategic bombardment. U.S. President Truman announces that it has been decided to use the atomic bomb to end the war in the Pacific as soon as possible. The cities of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and Nagasaki on August 9, 1945 were hit with an atomic bomb. The atomic bomb caused the loss of thousands of civilians. It maintains its warmth today. both as a psychological warfare and in terms of mass civilian destruction. On August 14, 1945, Japan agreed to surrender unconditionally. Japan's surrender document was signed on the battleship USS Missouri on September 2, 1945. Estimates of the total number of casualties in the war vary, as many deaths were not recorded. The most common estimate is that approximately 60 million people died in the war, including 20 million military personnel and 40 million civilians, most of the dead civilians. They died due to genocides, massacres, strategic bombings, infectious diseases, and hunger. In the Soviet Union alone, more than 27 million people died during the war, including 8.7 million soldiers and 19 million civilians. A quarter of the people living in the Soviet Union were injured or killed in the war. Germany suffered 5.3 million military casualties, most of them on the Eastern Front and in the final battles in Germany. The Soviet Gulag system became a death camp system in 1942 and 1943, when war-induced poverty and hunger led to the deaths of prisoners, including citizens of Poland and other Soviet-invaded countries, as well as Axis prisoners of war. Towards the end of the war, Soviet prisoners of war liberated from the camps where they were held captive, and Soviet citizens repatriated were subjected to an evaluation by the NKVD. With this evaluation, 127 people determined to be real or potential Nazi collaborators were sent to Gulag camps, Japanese prisoner of war camps, many of which were used as slave labor camps, also had a high death rate, according to the finding of the International Military Tribunal. For the Far East, the death rate for Western POWs was 27%, 37% for American POWs, 7 times higher than POWs under the Germans and Italians. I gave you brief information about the Second World War. I hope you liked the video and subscribe to the channel. Take care of yourself.
You are informed.